Chapter 125, Progress. Michael didn't know how much time had passed, but at some point, he found himself fighting level 3 monsters in the third wave. More monsters also began flooding into the community from outside, their numbers growing exponentially. Bone armor. If there was one thing Michael could say he loved about this chaotic mess, it was twofold. First, the experience points. Nothing could beat that. Michael wasn't even the one benefiting the most from the monstrous horde. It was his undead. Being at lower levels than him, they leveled up faster and before long had caught up to Michael's own level. Well, his previous level. Status window. Name: Michael Norman. Class: Adept Necromancer. Level 17. EXP: 1321/39867. All he knew was that he had leveled up twice. However, he hadn't even had time to properly check his status before rushing after the next group of monsters. And as for increasing his stats, Michael didn't see the point yet. The rank 3 monsters were level 20 at most, and even though he was technically lower leveled than them, he didn't feel the need to boost any of his stats. These creatures were simply too weak to warrant such action. If they'd all been rare rank monsters, then the situation might have been different, but fortunately for him, they weren't. All it took was a single swipe of his spear to end them. If one slash wasn't enough, a second would be enough to balance the equation. The second thing Michael was happy about was his skills. At first, he had planned to rely solely on his spear, keeping things simple and straightforward. But during the second wave, when the level 2 sand scorpions were nearly eradicated, an idea struck him. Why not use the opportunity to raise the proficiency of his skills? It wasn't as if his skills were useless. Yes, Michael wasn't just going to milk these monsters for their experience points. He was going to squeeze out every drop of value they could offer through training. And that's exactly what he did. Since the passive skill, spearmanship, had been his most used skill, it naturally saw the most noticeable improvement. The more he fought, the sharper and deadlier his movements became. If not for the knowledge that people were probably dying every minute outside the community, Michael might have thought he was in some kind of heaven. Spearmanship, Basic Mastery Proficiency, 62.14%. A fundamental skill for wielders of the spear, spearmanship improves the user's control, balance, and precision with this versatile weapon. It focuses on the physical mechanics and practical understanding of spear handling, making it easier to execute basic techniques. Though Michael was pleased with the rapid increase in proficiency of his spearmanship skill, he couldn't help but feel a bit puzzled. Sometimes, this was the downside of the skill system. It made it difficult to discern what someone was genuinely talented at. For the average human, the skill system made every awakener look like a genius. This was why Michael found himself questioning things. At first, he had jokingly claimed he had great comprehension since he'd unlocked the skill simply by reading about it. But now, it seemed there was truth in his joke. Perhaps he really did possess extraordinary comprehension and talent in the way of the spear. Of course, he had considered other possibilities. Could it be the result of his increasing intelligence stat? That was plausible. But intelligence primarily affected one's ability to learn magic-related skills or knowledge. Then again, the enhanced cognitive abilities that came as a side effect of higher intelligence might also contribute to his progress. Another possibility was that the spear itself was simply an easier weapon to master, and the skill system made it even easier. Or perhaps it was a combination of all these factors working together. In the end, it didn't really matter. Regardless of the reason, he was getting stronger, and that was enough. Aside from spearmanship, his other skills were also improving, well, with a few exceptions. Share senses was tricky to use in the midst of battle. Unfortunately, Michael couldn't act like a blind spearman with vision of two places at once while having to rely solely on his own senses to monitor his surroundings. For now, at least. As for skills like undead summoning and undead revival, they couldn't be used for obvious reasons. One skill, however, had recently stood out to Michael. Acid Shot Basic Mastery Proficiency, 12.07%. Acid Shot allows the user to launch a corrosive projectile that melts through materials and deals continuous damage. Range can be launched up to 5 meters. At first, Michael hadn't appreciated Acid Shot much, but now he realized its potential. Unlike a chemically created solution, Acid Shot was fueled entirely by his mana that was not only 100 times greater than that of the average human, but also exceptionally pure. With such high-quality mana as fuel, the corrosive effects of the skill were devastating. He'd proven this when he used it on a sand scorpion, a creature with good rock-like defenses. The acid melted through its carapace as though it were paper. Additionally, although the skill description stated it worked as a projectile, Michael discovered that, when he manually manipulated it, he could create a continuous stream. This, of course, drained his mana significantly, but it added another layer of versatility to the skill. It was yet another reminder that the system often didn't reveal everything about the true potential of some things. An Acid Shot wasn't the only skill with hidden depths. There was another skill Michael had grown fond of ever since it appeared. Bone Spear, Intermediate Mastery Proficiency, 19.2%. Bone Spear summons a sharp, ethereal spear made of bone to pierce through enemies. Travels up to 10 meters. Michael had always wondered why the range of this skill was so low despite being at Intermediate Mastery. That was until he discovered its true nature. Not only was there no limit to the number of spears he could create, the only restriction being his mana, but the 10-meter range, specified in the skill description, simply referred to the area within which he could control the projectile's direction. To Michael, it felt like some kind of domain skill, which made it even cooler in his eyes. It quickly became his fastest method of clearing enemies in the midst of a crowd. However, the sheer computational power required to control a large number of spears at once was staggering. Once the number of projectiles reached a certain threshold, the mental strain became terrifying. Also at Intermediate Mastery, it gained proficiency points at an exceptionally slow rate. Then there was the Slow Curse skill, which Michael discovered could be applied to multiple targets simultaneously. The only trade-off was increased mana consumption and a shorter duration of the curse's effect. As for Bone Armor, Michael activated and deactivated it repeatedly, even deliberately allowing himself to get hit so he could heal the damaged sections and raise the skill's proficiency points. All of this drained a significant amount of his mana, but not enough to worry him or push him to allocate attribute points to his intelligence. However, amidst all this chaos, there was one skill Michael loved the most, aside from Bone Spear, and that was Corpse Explosion. Corpse Explosion, Basic Mastery Proficiency, 8.7%. Corpse Explosion detonates the remains of a defeated enemy, causing a devastating area attack. Explosion radius, 4 meters. The monsters emerging from the level 3 cracks were the same. Long-armed monkeys. Standing at least 2 meters tall, their short legs and arms as long as their bodies gave them an odd appearance. But to Michael, their limbs weren't their most attracting feature. What bothered him was the color of their fur. It was bright pink. For a moment, the entire scene felt surreal. Michael didn't mind the color pink, but it was simply too vibrant. Too colorful to say. It clashed harshly with the grim, battle-ridden environment. Grabbing one of the corpses of a long-armed monkey, Michael activated Corpse Explosion. The skill was mana-intensive, but its effects were devastating. According to Michael's observations, the skill allowed him to infuse mana into a corpse, forming intricate magic pathways that turned the body into a volatile container. By using the lingering energy within the corpse, combined with his own mana, he could create a deadly bomb. The power of the explosion depended on several factors: the strength of the corpse, the amount of mana used, and the size of the body. It had its limitations, but in situations like this, it was an incredibly effective weapon. Michael hurled the prepared corpse toward a group of long-armed monkeys charging at one of his undead. The corpse struck one of the monsters, and in a cold, emotionless tone, Michael commanded, "Explode!" Boom! The corpse detonated instantly, tearing apart the group of monkeys. 3 died on the spot, their bodies reduced to mangled remains, while a 4th, just slightly outside the 4-meter blast radius, was injured. In one move, Michael had eliminated 4 enemies with a single corpse. That was the sheer destructive power of Corpse Explosion. Of course, the damage depended on the mana he poured into the corpse and the quality of the body itself. The stronger the corpse, the more devastating the explosion, and the greater the mana cost. As for the word he spoke before the explosion, it wasn't necessary. The activation was tied purely to his will, but saying it aloud helped solidify the mental image, ensuring the corpse exploded exactly when he intended. Michael had one of his undead finish off the injured monster and didn't stop. He charged through several more, tossing explosive corpses now and then. He couldn't help but admire the effect. For the first time, he understood why Myra seemed so excited about blowing things up. It was art. Explosion is art. Each blast sent shockwaves through the air, scattering the monsters and leaving destruction in its wake. The satisfaction of seeing it all unfold was oddly fulfilling. Between the explosions, Michael had his undead handle any survivors, ensuring no monster was left standing. Amid the chaos, he pulled out his phone, glanced at it, and quickly put it back. "No message, no signal, something's definitely wrong," he muttered. This world was far more advanced than Earth, even if Woodstone City didn't fully reflect that. Regardless of how chaotic the current situation was, it shouldn't have been enough to bring down network service. So it could only mean one thing. The lack of signal on his phone wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. It must be the work of the demonic supernaturals, Michael speculated. Just because he hadn't encountered any in his community didn't mean they weren't involved. In fact, they had already been participating in this mess from the very moment they summoned these cracks into the real world. Still, regardless of the broader situation, Michael's immediate task was to clear the monsters around him. Even so, he kept part of his focus on the bigger picture. He didn't particularly care about the Federation's reaction if something extreme was to happen, though he'd do his best to avoid antagonizing them. However, if a major event forced him to choose between the public and his family, his decision was clear. He'd choose his family. If possible, he'd also save parts of the public so his family could be included in the public. He saved to reduce any complications. But when it came down to it, his family would always come first. As these thoughts churned through his mind, Michael continued casting his skills and killing monsters, unaware of what was unfolding in other parts of the city. In a location far from Michael's apartment, Myra and Lillian stood side by side with a group of other supernaturals. This was another community, much better maintained than Michael's. Even in its ruined state, it was clear this place had been a cut above before chaos descended. Compared to Michael's community, where elevators in tall buildings no longer functioned, this one at least had some semblance of modern convenience. Perhaps because of the better environment, there were more supernaturals here, and not just more, but stronger ones as well. While Lillian and Myra were among the powerful individuals in Michael's community here, they weren't the strongest. The most powerful person in this area was an old cultivator who, as introductions revealed, was a retired soldier. Soldiers still existed in this world, but their role carried a unique meaning. With no internal wars within the Federation aside from conflicts with demonic supernaturals, soldiers were primarily needed for battles within dimensional cracks. And this wasn't just any soldier who had passed through a military academy. He was a cultivator. A late-stage rank 3 cultivator, no less. If Michael were present and aware of this fact, an old thought would undoubtedly resurface. Why are old people in the Federation so strong? One might wonder why Lillian was with Myra, given that they lived in different areas. For one, they had become the best of friends, brought together by their shared status as the only 2 females in their class to awaken and become awakeners. Lillian, like Michael, was an orphan, or at least she considered herself one. Lillian wasn't placed in an orphanage because her parents died, but because she was abandoned as a baby, left on the doorstep of an orphanage. Unfortunately, the orphanage where she grew up was far from a safe haven for children. The caretakers were terrible. Lillian was a slow learner, and while most adults might have sighed in frustration, the ones in charge of the orphanage were much harsher. They berated her, insulted her, and even revealed the harsh truth of her abandonment in front of the other children. And children, as anyone should know, are capable of cruelty if left unchecked. Bullying became the least of Lillian's worries. Life took a turn for the better when she entered senior high school and was adopted by a kind old woman. Finally, she was able to leave the orphanage. At school, most of her peers barely noticed her existence, and the occasional teasing was harmless compared to the torment she had endured. Her time with the old woman, though brief, was a source of solace. Tragically, the woman passed away a year later, leaving Lillian alone once more. But by then, she had learned how to fend for herself. Using the phone the old woman had gifted her, she began writing short stories on various platforms, earning just enough to survive. Then everything changed on the day the system panel appeared before her. Unlike her peers, Lillian lacked any standout talent or unique ability as an awakener, or so it seemed at first glance. Yet she adapted, as she always had, living alone and expecting little from the world. She never blamed anyone for her circumstances, and never felt entitled to care or kindness. So when Myra, the only person she could truly call a friend, called her, she didn't hesitate. And now, here she was, standing beside Myra, defending her community without hesitation or guilt that she left hers. It was the least she could do for one of the few people who treated her like an actual friend and a real person. Or at least, that's how Lillian saw it from her perspective. Someone who claimed she didn't need anyone but desperately wanted and needed someone to talk to. Someone who treated her normally. "Girl, do you have any of that paper?" The old cultivator turned toward Myra. Unlike Michael's community, this area was less destroyed, and the casualties were notably fewer. The presence of a rank 3 cultivator, along with 2 young awakeners, though not advanced to rank 1 yet but strong in their own right, played a significant role. Additionally, a few other supernaturals added to the defense. But the true reason for the community's relative safety lay with Myra. Myra had developed a way for even weaker supernaturals to fight more effectively, all thanks to the 2 coincidentally linked formulas she had unlocked at levels 5 and 10. Talismans. At level 5, Myra unlocked the Talisman Formula section, gaining her first 2 talisman-related formulas. While her initial formula, a potion for explosive effects, aligned with her natural talent for destruction, the 2 talismans she acquired were different. So, unfortunately, her talent didn't extend to enhancing them directly. However, their utility couldn't be denied. Feather Light Talisman. Effect: increases speed by 20%. Duration: depends on the strength of the user. Usage: place on the body and infuse mana. Wind/Talisman. Effect: condenses the wind element in the air to launch a sharp attack. Usage: infuse mana into it. Talismans, much like magic scrolls, provided strategic advantages in combat. Despite not being explosive, the two talismans proved instrumental in bolstering the defense of the community, especially for those who lacked the raw power to fight monsters head-on. Myra pulled out a bundle of talisman papers. Knowing that the old cultivator was asking for the other supernaturals around and not for himself, since he was far too strong to need her talismans, Myra reluctantly handed them over to the few rank 2 cultivators around. Rank 1 cultivators, if they weren't mages, couldn't manipulate mana outside or even within themselves, even if it was little, until rank 2, so they couldn't use talisman. This was where magic scrolls had an edge, since ordinary people are able to use it, since one just needed to tear the one-time item. However, Myra still preferred talisman. For one, talismans, unlike magic scrolls, were reusable until the energy within their inscriptions was depleted. While magic scrolls were more potent and could seal stronger spells for longer periods, talismans were cheaper, easier to make, and more flexible in usage. Of course, this flexibility came with a drawback. Talismans had a shorter lifespan than magic scrolls. However, given the materials for talismans were far more common, Myra considered the trade-off more than worthwhile. Also, unlike her previous creation, the mushroom potion, which acted as an explosive but required rare and expensive materials, limiting how many she could make, Myra was quite fond of the talismans. While they weren't explosive like she preferred, their materials were cheaper, and the process to make them wasn't too difficult. Perhaps this was because she was an awakener with a crafting skill that boosted her success rate, making the process smoother. After the recent hunt with Michael, Myra had managed to buy enough materials, magic paper and ink, to create 20 talismans of each formula within a day. The best part: they were highly sellable, capable of earning her more than twice what she had spent on the materials. Initially, Myra had planned to sell the talismans to fund her creations, as her class seemed to demand a lot of resources. But chaos had descended, ruining her plans. Now, for the sake of protecting the community, she had to give away these talismans, ones she had worked so hard to create, for free. She didn't regret her decision. No one would have known she even had these talismans if she hadn't spoken up. Still, that didn't mean she didn't feel the sting of her loss. She felt it a lot. At this time, the group protecting the community had just finished clearing the second wave. Some had died, and many were injured. Myra and Lillian, however, were reluctantly getting used to the sight. Well, maybe Myra was, but Lillian, at least in her usual state, still struggled. Yes, her usual state. Myra had noticed it ever since their hunt in the goblin world, something Michael had also picked on a bit in the ape region. Lillian wasn't exactly a normal girl. On the surface, she seemed ordinary enough, clumsy, quiet, and unassuming. But the moment she drew her weapon and spilled blood, something changed. It was as though a suppressed lunatic was unleashed, one who grew visibly excited at the sight of blood and fought with an intensity that bordered on madness. Worse, Lillian wasn't just some reckless berserker. She was a highly skilled combatant, her class giving her a natural edge in battle. This transformation only occurred in the heat of a fight. Outside of combat, she reverted to the shy, clumsy girl Myra had first come to know. While this change freaked Myra out a little, she had come to accept it. What Myra didn't realize, though, was how others viewed her in turn. In their eyes, she wasn't much better than Lillian. During battle, Myra transformed into something entirely different, violent and wild. To outsiders, the two were a peculiar pair, an expressionless ice princess and a shy, sunny girl in normal circumstances. But in the chaos of battle, they were both crazed warriors. After the second wave, the group cleared the surroundings a little and waited anxiously for the third wave. Myra glanced up at her apartment window. The light wasn't on, but she knew her mother was inside. Myra didn't know how her mother felt about all this, but she knew one thing. If she wanted to keep her safe, her place was outside, fighting, not hiding indoors. Still, Myra wasn't overly worried. She had left some means of protection for her mother, 2 pairs of mushroom potions. She felt uneasy in trusting her mom with something so volatile, especially since the potion only needed to be shaken violently to explode. However, since her mom was an ordinary person with no ability to manipulate mana and activate the talisman she had made, this was the best Myra could do. Despite her worries, Myra reassured herself that as long as no monster reached her mother, everything would be fine. Yet, alongside her worry, there was anger simmering beneath the surface. If there were people in Woodstone City who knew about the actions of the supernaturals and didn't feel anger, Lillian might be among them. But for Myra, and a few others like her, that indifference didn't exist. Just like Michael, Myra didn't care much about most people. But for the select few she did care about, her feelings ran deep. And now, the thought of some group of lunatics trying to take her mother away from her filled her with fury. The battle in the city raged on. More lives were lost. Some grew stronger amidst the chaos. Others lost everything they held dear. And a few, like Brian, found themselves at the most pivotal moments of their lives. Boom! Brian didn't know how long he'd been trading blows, but it felt like an eternity. At this point, his appearance had changed drastically. His hair was now snow white, not with the elegance of age, but the pallor of illness. His body had grown gaunt and pale, exuding a heavy sense of weakness despite the terrifying aura radiating from him. Also, his left arm was missing. Give up and cough, cough. In the void, Peter tried once more to persuade Brian to surrender, only to end up coughing blood. His face turned ashen. He knew his time was running out. If the battle dragged on any longer, he wouldn't survive. This was why he had never wanted to face the Mad Phoenix. Having a strong law was one thing, but having a law among the strongest was entirely different. Brian's law. The law of eternal embers. Peter had often called it the nemesis of nearly everything, even those of its kind. In the beginning, Peter had held the upper hand. As a rank 5 cultivator with a more complete law, his energy far exceeded Brian's. Though the law of eternal embers was a force that consumed anything and everything for energy, it functioned much like feeding a dog. No matter how much it could eat, there was always a limit, and it couldn't be fed its entire capacity all at once. Similarly, while the law of eternal embers could devour most things, it had its own constraints. Yet, countering it was even more challenging, as attempting to extinguish its flames with an overwhelming surge of law energy often backfired, turning the excess energy into fuel for its insatiable fire. However, even a rank 5 cultivator had his limits. Now Peter was barely holding on. The only thing keeping him alive was the thin barrier of energy coating his body, shielding him from the flames. But it was a temporary measure. The law of eternal embers continued to feed on his energy, growing stronger with every passing moment. The void they were trapped in was in shambles, chaotic energy tearing through it, threatening to collapse at any moment. Yet Brian, holding a treasure that could have allowed him to escape, made no move to leave. One of them was going to die here. And Brian had already decided. The sea of blue flames swirled around him, their glow illuminating his gaunt figure as he spoke. His voice was deep and calm, unshaken by the chaos around him. Have you ever regretted killing Isabella in these past 50 years? Peter had initially been relieved, seeing Brian finally open his mouth to speak. Ever since the first blow was thrown, not a single word had been exchanged between them. Seeing Brian turn to address him made Peter almost believe the Mad Phoenix wasn't as suicidal as he seemed. However, it was clear he thought too much, or rather thought too soon. "What bullshit are you talking about?" Peter finally snapped. He barely had any energy left, and he could feel the terrifying flames of the law of eternal embers closing in on him. Any moment now, if the flames touched his physical body, it would be over. The fear of death clawed at him, and the words he expected didn't come. Brian repeated his question. Have you ever regretted killing Isabella in these past 50 years? Though his voice was emotionless, there was something in the way he said it. If Peter had paid attention, he might have noticed how much this question meant to Brian. And it did. Brian didn't expect this to change the result of their battle, but he wanted to know. He wanted to know if Peter, the friend he had once trusted, laughed with, and shared everything with, still existed somewhere beneath the bitterness and hatred. Why the hell would I care about her? Why would I care about the daughter of the woman you stole from me? Why did Lyra choose you and not me? Why has everything always gone your way? Why are you so much better than me? Why? Peter's voice cracked as the words tumbled out, his tears falling freely. Brian didn't respond. He stood there silently, as every word hit him like a blade. He had suspected Peter's bitterness, but hadn't realized just how deeply it ran. Memories flooded his mind. For the first time, Brian questioned himself. Had he really been a good friend? But that didn't matter anymore. Whatever Peter's reasons, whatever his bitterness, it didn't excuse Isabella's death. She was innocent. She hadn't deserved to die for her father's actions. Brian's grief and anger burned brighter than ever. He didn't wait for Peter's energy to be fully depleted. Blaze of devoural. "Nu-woo," Peter screamed, his voice full of despair. "Goodbye, friend," Brian said softly. And then the flames consumed everything. At first, driven by the rage that had consumed him throughout the battle, Brian planned to slowly burn Peter to ashes if he emerged victorious. But in the end, he couldn't bring himself to do it, not to his old friend. Instead, he granted Peter a quick death. It might not have been painless, but it was swift. "If reincarnation exists, I hope your next life treats you better," Brian murmured. His focus shifted elsewhere. Though he had erased Peter's existence from the world, Brian hadn't truly destroyed everything of his. Not completely. Well, in truth, what remained was never really Peter's to begin with. "Isabella," Brian whispered, his gaze falling to the darkness swirling in his palm, a lost seed. This small object carried a connection to two of the most important people in his heart. A lost seed was an incredibly rare resource. With it, a peak rank 4 cultivator could immediately begin advancing toward rank 5, making it highly sought after. It could also be consumed by those who had comprehended a law but had yet to fuse it into their own seed, accelerating their progress. Even rank 5 cultivators coveted such seeds to speed their cultivation. But Brian had no intention of using it in the traditional sense. Not when it was the last tangible connection to his daughter. Clothing and material possessions decayed over time. They could be carefully preserved, but their meaning could never compare to what this organ in his hand represented. "With this, I've avenged you, Isabella, Lyra. I'm sorry, Peter. Why?" In the end, the ever-cold Brian broke down, tears spilling from his eyes. For the sake of vengeance, he had sacrificed everything. But in doing so, the bottleneck that had trapped him for so long began to loosen. Freed from the shackles of hatred, the once stagnant barrier to rank 5 cultivation started to dissolve. A terrifying aura emanated from Brian's body as his sobs subsided. I guess what remains now is to. His voice grew firm. Become a god. It was the goal he had promised to the 3 people who mattered most to him. For the first time in a long while, Brian felt that hunger for power reignite within him. He glanced down at the lost seed in his hand. Perhaps after reaching the godly realm, he could finally fulfill that. Determined, Brian sat cross-legged in the void, his expression resolute. King rank, emperor rank, demigod rank, and even that rank, my journey starts here. On the day countless lives were lost, a phoenix was reborn. One that would scorch everything in its path to achieve its goal. Outside the void, Michael surveyed his surroundings with a deep frown etched on his face. The steadily decreasing number of monsters made it clear that the level 3 cracks were beginning to close, but the devastation they left behind was undeniable. The battlefield was already overflowing with corpses, despite Michael's best efforts to manage the chaos in the little time he had. The sheer number and size of the fallen monsters had transformed the area into a grotesque landscape of death. Around the community, hills of scattered flesh and gore piled high. The fighting itself now took place atop heaps of bodies and rivers of blood. While Michael had not been affected by it, and even benefited from the corpses surrounding him, the presence of so many corpses distracted him. It wasn't the sight of the corpses that disturbed Michael. It was the human corpses that caught his attention. Michael had never created a human undead before. For a brief moment, curiosity took hold of him. He wondered what the evolution of a human undead would look like. How would it be different from his usual creations? Would there be a distinction between a normal human corpse and that of a cultivator? The temptation to take a few bodies into his storage space flickered in his mind. No one would notice after all. But as soon as the thought crossed his mind, Michael felt a jolt of shock. What was he thinking? He quickly corrected himself, but the sight of the corpses and the lingering greed gnawed at the edges of his resolve. For a fleeting moment, his thoughts drifted elsewhere. I wonder what the demonic supernaturals are doing now, and where they are. With the disappearance of the level 3 cracks, Michael leveled up to level 18. From the start of the chaos until now, Michael had leveled up 3 times. He wasn't sure how to feel about it. Should he be glad that he finally found an opportunity to level up as he wanted, or should he feel guilty about the circumstances that allowed it? For a moment, Michael felt a heavy weight in his chest. However, the feeling was fleeting, and a serious expression soon replaced it. Michael turned his gaze to the sky. The number of cracks had visibly reduced, and the sky was now clearer and easier to look at. But the clearer sky didn't ease Michael's mood. This time, it wasn't about greed or the dwindling number of monsters that would appear. No, it was the level of the monsters that concerned him now. Level 4 monsters. In the cultivation power system, every advancement after the 3rd rank was a significant leap, far more so than the ranks before it. Michael had only been a supernatural for a few days, so it was hard to claim he knew much. Still, thanks to his occasional browsing of the Supers Association forum, he understood more now than he had pre-awakening. While the specifics of advancing to rank 4 were still a mystery to him, he knew enough to recognize its significance. The leap from rank 3 to rank 4 was much harder than the previous advancements, which made sense given the massive power difference. For cultivators, rank 4 granted not just more power, but also new abilities like the ability to fly, an extended lifespan and greater limits. Michael wasn't fully aware of all the intricacies, but he understood one thing. The monsters now coming through the cracks were on a whole different level of strength. Rank 4 monsters corresponded to Rank 2 monsters in the Awakeners grading system, which meant a Rank 4 monster started at level 26. This was a level even Michael had to take seriously. Why wouldn't he? He wasn't remotely qualified to look down on such monsters. It was also said that the next rank of monsters in the cultivation system, Rank 5, was even stronger. The forum posts he had read didn't reveal much, but Michael had every reason to believe that a Rank 5 monster matched the strength of a Rank 5 cultivator. What made things worse was the presence of a level 5 crack above the scattered level 4 cracks. At a glance, the level 5 crack looked similar in size to the other level 4 cracks. However, Michael knew it wasn't the same. He didn't understand the mechanisms behind the current situation, but the level 5 crack had seemed to remain dormant during the first 3 waves. Yet, the moment level 4 cracks became clear to the public, the level 5 crack, once emitting the same energy as a level 4 crack, began to widen, releasing chaotic energy that was entirely different from the others. Michael could see one such crack clearly and faintly sensed the aura of 2 more. This did nothing to ease his growing tension. Though it seemed there wasn't a rank higher than level 5 in the current wave, it was important to remember one thing. As the rank of cracks increased, the number of monsters they released decreased. But it wasn't just one monster per crack. So, what would happen if more than one level 5 monster appeared in Woodstone City? Putting aside whether he had the ability to protect others, Michael wasn't even sure he'd survive. Level 5 monsters matched King rank cultivators, which happened to align with a rank 3 awakener. Michael wasn't entirely sure why the system worked this way, but he assumed there must be some truth to it. As an awakener himself, he could only imagine the strength of a rank 3 awakener. For a cultivator to be compared to that rank, and for a monster to match such power, only emphasized how terrifying such creatures would be. This was why Michael wore a grim expression. Unfortunately, the energy emitted by the level 5 cracks only became distinct after the level 3 cracks had disappeared. If Michael had been aware of a level 5 crack's presence from the beginning of the chaos, he would have chosen a different approach rather than simply standing guard over his community. Does the association have anyone who can handle a level 5 crack? He wondered aloud, though his expectations were low. He doubted the Federation lacked king-rank cultivators altogether, but this wasn't the Federation, it was Woodstone City, a city that didn't even attract many supernaturals in the first place. Even if there was a king-rank cultivator here, 1 or 2 wouldn't be enough. Michael's mind was in disarray. He couldn't understand how a level 5 crack could have appeared so suddenly. Though he had a theory. Perhaps these weren't actual level 5 cracks at the start. Perhaps, due to some unknown factor, level 4 cracks had mutated into level 5 cracks. Michael suspected this because, while the level 5 crack was tinted red and emanated chaotic energy, showing it was nearing a break, it didn't seem like it would erupt immediately. Even as an amateur in such matters, Michael was confident the crack wouldn't release its monsters for at least another 3 hours. With that small window, there was still time to make preparations. For now, he turned his attention back to the level 4 cracks. Those needed to be dealt with first. Since the situation demanded seriousness, Michael immediately stretched out his hands, summoning the 2 undead who had been left out of the previous waves. These 2 had missed out on the fun of clearing the earlier 3 waves, losing potential experience points in the process. However, had he brought them out from the start, it was hard to say who would have caused more destruction, the undead brothers or the crack monsters. There was another reason Michael had held them back. The rest of his undead needed to remain close to their current levels, not just grow stronger. He hadn't forgotten his experiment with Prince. The stronger the undead before evolving, the stronger it became after evolution, at least in terms of levels. This was why, despite Lucky being of a higher race rank than Prince, they were both at the same level. Prince had evolved into a 3-star rare rank undead at a higher level, while Lucky had reached a similar rank at only level 11. The experiment with Prince had helped Michael figure out the best way to maximize the value of his undead's evolution. Make them stronger before evolution to create even more powerful undead after. That was the formula. Unfortunately, Michael hadn't had much time in the past few days to dedicate to strengthening his undead. To make them stronger, they needed experience points, something Michael also didn't have an abundance of. However, that would change in the future, once he was no longer in constant rush mode and could devote time to other pursuits. Looking at Lucky and Prince, who were now standing before him, busy inspecting their appearances, a trace of worry flickered in Michael's eyes. The brothers were strong, no doubt, and had recovered from their battle with that corrupted creature in the ruins of his initial location in the land of origin. But they weren't yet back to their peak and still carried hidden injuries within their bodies. Setting aside the current crisis, it would already be a miracle if they emerged from this without worsening their injuries. Michael suspected that evolution might restore the undead to their peak state, essentially healing them, but it was only a suspicion, not something he could confirm. So, aside from ensuring they could fully exert their power, he also had to be cautious about preventing their hidden injuries from getting worse. Hopefully, the level 4 monsters aren't too strong, Michael muttered. The incoming monsters would be at least level 26, but their difficulty would heavily depend on their race rank. If they were 1-star rare rank creatures, Prince, who was a 3-star rare rank, and Lucky, now a 1-star extraordinary rank creature, would easily wipe them out. But if they matched Prince's race rank, the battle would become significantly harder. There was another issue. As poison-type creatures, Prince and Lucky excelled at crowd control with their poison and plant manipulation skills, which covered wide areas. However, their true strength lay in being deployed as solo units. Whether the battle would be easy like the previous 3 waves or turn into something far worse would soon be revealed. If the incoming monsters were all just 1-star rare rank creatures at level 26, Michael would crush them with raw strength. But if they were higher rank creatures with higher levels, he'd have no choice but to fight carefully or escape. However, Michael wasn't given much time to plan or organize his thoughts. The moment he summoned Lucky and Prince, monsters began pouring out of the level 4 cracks. Why is everything so different? In the previous 3 crack breaks, there had always been a period of rest before the next wave. But after the 3rd wave, the 4th one came almost immediately, leaving Michael wondering if something abnormal was happening, like the appearance of the level 5 crack. Whatever, let's just get this done, Michael muttered, planting himself firmly in place. The full appearance of the monsters emerging from the level 4 cracks came into view. Are those griffins? The monsters emerging from the level 4 cracks truly caught Michael off guard. He had grown accustomed to crack monsters falling from the sky to the ground, allowing him and his group to immediately gang up on them for a quick first strike. This time, however, no monsters fell to the floor. Instead, the creatures that emerged were airborne. Eagle wings, sharp eagle claws, an eagle's head, and a lion's body with a tail. Michael's mind immediately jumped to 2 possibilities. The first was a chimera, a stitched-up abomination of a monster, and the second was a griffin, a creature often mentioned in fantasy stories both in this world and on Earth. Taking a closer look at the flying monsters, griffins seemed like the most fitting term to describe them. However, no matter what they were called, one thing remained certain: they were monsters. And monsters were creatures of destruction. The moment Michael spotted the monsters in the air, a grimace spread across his face. They can fly," he muttered, his tone laced with frustration. It hadn't even been a day since the exhausting battle against those winged gargoyles, and now another airborne threat was upon him. The sight of these flying creatures did little to lift his spirits. But Michael barely had time to process his frustration before reality set in. Monsters emerging from cracks were bloodthirsty creatures of destruction. Their nature was simple: attack anything that wasn't their kind. Specifically, any being not created from negative energy became their target, even if it was another monster. This universal hostility became evident as soon as the griffins appeared. The level 4 cracks weren't directly over Michael's community, but they were high in the sky, looming above it. The moment the griffins spotted their targets, they dove toward them without hesitation. Michael wasn't their only target. Some griffins flew toward other locations, suggesting there were still survivors outside his community. But the largest group of griffins, numbering around 30, charged straight for him. The creatures weren't just reacting to Michael alone. They were drawn to the dense concentration of life within his community. Though a few individuals who had survived the previous waves by luck or Michael's protection remained scattered nearby, the griffins ignored them entirely, focusing instead on Michael and the largest cluster of life signs. Seeing the swarm of monsters heading directly for him made Michael's heart pound. The aura radiating from the griffins was strong, almost comparable to the winged gargoyles he had fought earlier. However, there was a key difference between the two groups of monsters. The gargoyles had been calculated, attacking from a distance, while these griffins, consumed by their corrupted minds, were reckless, choosing to charge straight into close combat. This suited Michael just fine. "Attack!" Michael didn't waste a second, his voice ringing out as he commanded his undead to engage the incoming horde. Though it seemed like Michael had been addressing all his undead, this couldn't be further from the truth. From the very beginning, his reliance had always been on Lucky and Prince. The others, while useful, couldn't compare to the sheer power of these two. Why is there a level 5 crack in the air? This thought raced through the minds of every supernatural in Woodstone City as they sensed the chaotic energy swirling above after the third wave. Even the demonic supernaturals, who were the cause of the entire situation in the first place, froze in shock. Immediately, the idea of retreating took root in the minds of all the demonic supernaturals. If there was one thing they valued more than power, it was their lives. To save themselves, they wouldn't hesitate to abandon their so-called partners without a second thought. As expected, the moment the demonic supernaturals sensed the chaotic energy of the level 5 crack, they began to withdraw. This wasn't just because of the appearance of a higher level crack. It was also because their original plan involved evacuating after the third wave. The monsters that would appear in the next wave were already at level 4, on par with the strongest individuals in Woodstone City. Every super association branch had a manager, and to qualify for that position, one needed at least a master rank cultivation level, the 4th realm in the cultivation system. In a backward outpost like Woodstone City, which was considered so even in the world of supernaturals, this level of power was considered the peak and sufficient enough. This was why the demonic supernaturals had believed the level 4 crack would be sufficient to destroy the city, or, at the very least, cripple most of it. The plan was meticulous, unleashing chaos before the level 4 crack, which was supposed to be the grand finale. But why was a level 5 crack appearing now? The demonic supernaturals who had already started withdrawing felt fortunate for their foresight. As for their partners who were still embroiled in battle when the level 5 crack revealed itself, they didn't care. The plan to cause more chaos till the third wave had been executed successfully, and what happened to the rest was their problem. Or so they thought. Barely a few minutes later, the level 4 crack, which was supposed to take time to fully break, shattered instantly. Like Michael, every supernatural was caught off guard by the sudden escalation. Unfortunately, the monsters gave them no time to think. Chaos reigned as the creatures attacked indiscriminately. Two things became constant during this mayhem. More people, ordinary and supernatural alike, died, and for the first time in living memory, members of the Super Association and demonic supernaturals were forced to work together for survival. However, none of this had anything to do with Michael, nor did it concern Myra and her companion Liliona. But it did involve someone else. Someone who had no idea that his recent battle had unleashed such chaotic energy into the area, causing nearby cracks to mutate. That someone was Brian. Brian sat cross-legged in midair within the dark void. The chaotic energy that had once scattered across the space during his battle with Peter had finally settled. There was no longer a trace of the blue flames caused by his law, as he had absorbed them to heal his injuries before attempting to advance. This was why Peter had referred to the law as a cursed one, not because it was truly cursed, but from another perspective. To most other master and king-ranked cultivators, this law was considered broken. It was also why the flames generated by the law and the law itself were often spoken of as the flames of a phoenix. Phoenixes were creatures of fire, famous for their ability to be reborn. Though not as mighty as the phoenixes described in ancient stories, Brian's law shared certain characteristics and traits, earning it the comparison. At the moment, a strange aura emanated from Brian's body. As he sat cross-legged in the dark void, his body radiated a strange aura, and a level of intensity grew around him. The law of eternal embers. It was a terrifying, destructive force, one rooted in both the principles of perpetual burning and the rebirth that came from fire. This law was not only about destruction, it was about eternal persistence, about something that never ceased, always burning and regenerating. As Brian focused, his understanding of his law deepened. He felt the flames within him flare with more ferocity, their heat intensifying, pushing him past the threshold he had long struggled with. Suddenly, a surge of power broke through his body, his cultivation level shifting. Brian's aura rippled and expanded outward. It was intense, yet only continued to grow stronger slowly. Brian didn't know how much time he had spent in this state, but by the time he came out of it, he was a new man. So this is the realm of kings. Brian felt the power within him and couldn't help but be shocked. The energy coursing through his body was so strong that he thought it might be an illusion. But it was real. This was his power. Finally, after 50 long years, a king was born. However, the joy of reaching a new realm could be celebrated later. To avoid further complications, Brian had to quickly stabilize his realm before anything else. In that moment, Brian realized he had forgotten something important. The city he was meant to protect had already turned to ruins. Michael looked at his surroundings with a frown. He didn't know how much time had passed, but the last griffin in his location had fallen to Lucky's vines. Unfortunately, the destruction caused by the battle had nearly leveled the community. Though Michael made sure no one died, he couldn't guarantee that they had a home to return to. No, it wasn't only them. Michael turned to look outside the community, his sharp eyesight seeing more than an ordinary human could ever perceive. Above, the sky was still filled with flying monsters. Occasionally, Michael saw them drag a living person up into the air, only to drop them. With the destruction that had befallen Woodstone City, it was a wonder if anyone would have a home after this. Black Griffin LV, 28. Rank Rare. Black Griffin LV, 27. Rank Rare. Black Griffin LV, 29. Rank Rare. The griffins were indeed as powerful as the gargoyles, if not more so, but their almost senseless attacks made the battle more chaotic than the fight with the gargoyles back in the land of origin. On one side it was against 2 monsters, and on the other it was against 30. Even though the griffins were somewhat disorganized, they had strong combat abilities, and their numbers were overwhelming. They could also cast skills from a distance, making the battle far from easy. But Michael was somewhat satisfied, because they didn't follow the gargoyle exact approach. In a way, the 3 away a lot of their advantage, which eventually led to their defeat. Unfortunately, the bodies of the griffins were quite large, and while he could manage to store 1 and perhaps squeeze 2, it still wasn't practical. However, Michael didn't care about practicality. Only the heavens knew how the association would react to the looming level 5 threat in the sky, but Michael wasn't about to wait and find out. The current threat wasn't over yet, as monsters were still roaming everywhere outside the community. At first, Michael had been unwilling to enter the land of origin, but now that Lucky and Prince were by his side, he took the risk. His purpose this time was simple: to turn this mysterious world into a storage space again. With quick strides, Michael began storing a portion of the monsters he had killed in the real world into the land of origin. He had leveled up 3 times now, and was even close to reaching the next level thanks to his and his undead's efforts. At level 18, he had more contract slots, and there were a few interesting monsters he was keen on turning into undead. The sand scorpion. Though too colorful for his taste, the long-armed monkeys, and the one he was most excited about, the griffins, were all on his list. The hobgoblins were also not a bad choice, and they saved him an evolution point, since to evolve a goblin into a hobgoblin would require this much cost. All of this was for his future slots. Unfortunately for the griffins, he would need to increase his intelligence stat to even have a chance at contracting a rank 2 creature. This would also be the first time he was contracting a strong undead, like traditional necromancers. If he managed to get out of the mess in the real world with no trouble, Michael decided that after trying out undead summoning on any griffin he managed to revive, regardless of the result, he would use his evolution points to evolve it and see what strength it would gain. One must note that if Michael successfully revived a griffin, as it was a rare rank creature, evolving it would raise it to a 3-star rare rank griffin, which could potentially reach level 42, close to rank 3. The strength of an undead before evolution would determine its strength after evolution. So as a creature already at rank 2, evolving it would only make it stronger, far stronger than Lucky and Prince. However, for now, he had other things to focus on. What do I do now? A frown appeared on Michael's face as he gazed at the fortified building where his family was staying. Just before he could make a decision, his phone, tightly secured in his pocket, vibrated. Without hesitation, Michael pulled it out. "The network's back," he muttered, noticing the immediate signal. Thoughts of whether the demonic supernaturals had been dealt with crossed his mind, but when he read the email that had caused his phone to vibrate, his face shifted between a frown and doubt. It was essentially the same message the association had sent before the chaos, but now it had a very different tone. "Urgent, monsters are in the city. Demonic supernaturals are retreating. Every supernatural is mandated to protect the public. Noncompliance will result in severe punishment. Repeat, all Federation-affiliated supernaturals in Woodstone City must safeguard the public from immediate threats. Free use of abilities in public is permitted. Reinforcement will arrive soon. Reinforcement will arrive soon. May the will of Aurora live for 1,000,000 years." What made Michael frown was the fact that he was still mandated to protect the public, at the risk of putting himself in danger. The worst part, if he followed the Federation's orders, he knew he might have to leave his family behind. However, the message from the association wasn't entirely unpleasant. "The demonic supernaturals are retreating. Michael was about to briefly ponder the reason when he remembered the cracks in the sky. Figures, no one would want to die. The thought of the demonic supernaturals leaving freely after all the chaos they caused made Michael frown deeper, but there was nothing he could do about the entire group. He clicked his tongue in annoyance. One piece of news did bring Michael some relief: the mention of reinforcements. If a strong supernatural being was coming here, even from another city, Michael didn't think it would take them long to arrive. Hopefully they arrive fast and are strong enough, he muttered. Michael turned his gaze toward the cracks in the sky, focusing his senses on the 3 level 5 cracks. Although his senses were still amateur, he could tell they wouldn't open for at least another 2 hours, unless something unexpected happened. I'll do as the association says, but if the situation doesn't change in the next hour. Michael didn't finish his thought, but several plans were already swirling in his mind. One thing he knew for sure: the Federation hadn't made him loyal enough to sacrifice his life for their cause. Michael thought hard for a moment about his next move. With the monsters swarming outside the community, the decision to hunt felt natural. To him, they were all experience points waiting to be claimed. While he doubted he could reach the max level for rank 1 today, unless he somehow killed every monster in the city, Michael figured that taking down a large portion of the ones nearby should allow him to level up at least twice. That would put him just 5 levels away from level 25, the maximum for rank 1. Although the experience required to level up increased exponentially, even surpassing the total he had already gained to reach his current level, it was better than being 10 levels behind. Michael made up his mind quickly. I'll leave Lucky here to guard my mom. Prince and a few undead will follow me for speed and strength, while the rest stay behind with Lucky, he decided. Since the association wanted him to protect the public, he would, just not by playing the hero or rescuing people. Instead, he'd clean the streets of monsters. For the first time in both of his lives, Michael felt genuinely eager to do what could technically be called community service. Before leaving, Michael sent a message to his aunt, knowing the network was still up. Michael, the crisis is almost over, don't worry. Everything is fine. Call me immediately if something comes up. After sending the message, he switched his phone from vibrate to audible mode. No one in his family and the other people within his protection currently knew what was happening outside the fortifications he had built for them. While he could go in and give them a briefing, Michael was far too lazy to bother. They were safer within the defenses he had created, and that was enough. As for the supernaturals inside the dome, Michael figured they wouldn't want to leave its protection, so he couldn't care less about them. He also doubted this would cause trouble. No one was likely to sell themselves out, and the association wouldn't be foolish enough to punish someone who had actively helped keep the public safe at the start of the chaos like these men. They were also living beings. Despite their tendency to act like overlords, Michael believed the association understood that supernaturals were also people with emotions. Push them too far, and they might end up siding with the demonic forces instead. In the end, things were just as Michael expected, and even less complicated than he had imagined. The association wanted the public protected, but didn't expect supernaturals to sacrifice themselves for the cause. Their basic requirement was compliance with the command. How many lives were actually saved? That was left to fate. As long as the whole city wasn't wiped out. Before moving out of the community, Michael finally armed himself, unlike what he had been unable to do at the start of the chaos. Under the protection of Lucky and Prince, he wore the size-fitting armor he had bought for his undead, along with his spear. Though advancing had brought great changes to Michael, physically it only made him a little taller with paler skin. Compared to his orcs, he still looked small, but the armor fitted him properly. Michael did a little move around, and his flexibility wasn't affected. Great! Michael was once again happy with his purchase. Finally, for the last step, Michael turned to inspect his status after so many level ups. His stats had increased, but they barely brought significant strength to him. However, overall, he was better than before the level up to level 16. Also, thanks to his race and class, he now had 18 more attribute points, together with his previous 30, making it 48 in total. Such an amount was enough to boost his strength in any kind, but Michael didn't touch it yet. If one wasn't about to advance, it was advisable to keep attribute points, as one wouldn't know what situation they could be in the future, where they needed a quick boost to a certain stat. However, this opinion was suggestive, as there were other awakeners who believed that immediate use of attribute points was better for their own valid reasons. Then there was the third group that didn't care and did whatever they liked with their attribute points. Michael didn't know which group he belonged to and didn't really care much about it. In the end, he did whatever he wanted to do with his attribute points, though he couldn't deny he liked to only use it when he felt the need to. Then there was his contract slots. It had increased by another 6. Seeing his contract slots, Michael couldn't help but feel it was little. Though he didn't know them, he really envied those that had 5 contract slots every level up due to their strong soul. Perhaps even these existences wouldn't desire to have a lot of undead, but for Michael, the number of undead he could have was more significant to him than other necromancers, who increased their numbers for either more flexibility, overall battle power, and so on. For Michael, it was because of the evolution points each head of undead provided him. If from the start, he was like those existences that could get 5 contract slots per level up, by now, he'd have at least 90 contract slots, which meant every day he'd be receiving at least 90 daily evolution points. At this point, he didn't even need to spend money on looking for items that would give him evolution points, and just rely on his daily points and accumulate them. There must be some treasure out there in the world that can increase the soul talent of a person, if I can get my hands on one. Michael couldn't help but imagine a future where a random stone thrown at his undead army could hit an extraordinary rank creature. The future was exciting to look forward to. However, that future was still far off for Michael. At least, the future where he commanded a large number of extraordinary rank undead. Or even another idea he had once entertained. If other professionals could control undead like necromancers, albeit with many restrictions, didn't that mean he could potentially do the same in another field? Perhaps even tame beasts like beast tamers, though with added limitations. Michael didn't know the exact mechanics of the beast tamer class, but he knew it also relied on a contract slot system. While not as numerous as the slots available to necromancers, it functioned similarly. If he could somehow acquire the method to tame a beast like beast tamers did, would that finally allow him to evolve a creature that wasn't an undead? It was an exciting thought, but once again, it was a future beyond the reach of the current Michael. After doing what he needed to and issuing a simple command for Lucky and the other undead, basically to kill every monster in sight without straying too far from the apartment where his family was, Michael prepared to leave his community. Michael had stationed Lucky around his apartment as an added safeguard. The team he took with him was small, consisting of Prince, Lily, an undead verdant wolf, a male orc, and a female orc shaman who also controlled fire. Michael had deliberately left the water element shaman behind to guard the community. He had observed her fighting before. She was strong, but unlike Lily and the fire element shaman, the water shaman, even as an undead that had recently awakened intelligence, understood not to rely too much on her magic. This wasn't to say the water element was weak. No, Michael had seen its destructive potential the first time she used it. She had created a massive flood of water, But not only did it fail to deal significant damage, it also ended up affecting the other undead nearby. Until she could cast proper skills with her water magic, the full potential of her abilities would remain unrealized. The same issue extended to Lily and the fire element shaman. While they could still cause significant damage even with reduced ranges, their true power would only manifest when they could learn and wield magical skills. Unfortunately, all the female shamans under Michael were essentially blank slates. Their only ability was basic elemental control. To acquire magical skills, Michael figured they'd have to learn them on their own. However, being connected to an awakener provided them with a unique advantage, the ability to level up. Their skills were even classified in a way similar to those of awakeners. This was something neither the monsters in the real world nor in the land of origin had. From his experience with his undead using their skills, Michael believed it wouldn't take long for his shamans to develop into proper magician undead. After leaving his community, Michael was finally confronted with the scene of destruction he had imagined, but it was far worse than he had expected. Far in the distance, he could make out the broken remains of buildings that had once been familiar. The roads were filled with massive craters, likely caused by monsters crashing down from the sky. Scattered across the ground were the incomplete bodies of humans. The sight was gruesome. "Is this the apocalypse?" Michael muttered, his voice low. Perhaps to him, it was just another chaotic event, but for the ordinary people who had lived through it, this scene must have looked like something straight out of an apocalyptic movie. For a brief moment, Michael caught a glimpse of what the apocalypse over 200 years ago might have been like. That event had to have been even worse, even though strong monsters hadn't appeared in the beginning. After all, it had been the same for awakeners. The first of their kind hadn't emerged until the monsters grew stronger. Aside from the ruined environment he had once called home and the mangled bodies scattered around, there were also monsters roaming nearby. The moment they spotted him, they charged in his direction without hesitation. Michael didn't even need to move. The male undead orc stepped forward, its hammer raised, and sent a devastating strike at the leading monster. The long-armed monkey didn't stand a chance. It was obliterated, its body reduced to pieces in an instant. Behind the first monster came more of its kind, a rushing group of long-armed monkeys. Michael didn't need to issue a command. His undead still followed the last orders he had given them, clear any monster on sight. And that was exactly what they did. With the undead orc's attack as a signal, the rest of the undead joined in. Everyone aside from Michael and Prince charged forward. In mere moments, the monsters in front of Michael were annihilated. "Move out," Michael ordered. The undead, aside from Prince, vanished from his view. He had given them a simple instruction through their connection. This time, while it was the same as before, it was more serious. "Clear all monsters within 300 meters of my location." This was the order Michael had given. This allowed Michael to farm experience points faster, even if each kill gave only a small amount. If his connection range with his undead were longer, even without using shared vision, he would have sent them farther. "Now, Prince, it's time to carry your daddy," Michael said with a smile. "All you've got to do is capture every monster we encounter and hold them for me to kill, just like we did in the goblin world, okay?" Prince. As Michael continued to exploit his undead in the most efficient way to grow stronger, the Federation, now free from dealing with the demonic supernaturals, scrambled to restore stability to the ruined city. However, they could only do their best. Woodstone City, though considered backward, was still a large city with a population of at least 2 million. The demonic supernaturals had caused cracks to spread throughout the entire city, and the weakest level 1 cracks alone numbered in the hundreds. Even though the supernaturals affiliated with the Supers Association tried their best to suppress the monsters, tens of thousands of them remained scattered across the city. To make matters worse, not only were there far more monsters than there were supernaturals, but many of the monsters were also significantly stronger. When the cracks first appeared in the sky, it wasn't just the ordinary public who were alarmed. The ones most on edge were the supernaturals, especially those familiar with cracks. Immediately, both branches of the Supers Association in Woodstone City contacted each other to discuss the matter. However, just as the news about the situation being linked to demonic supernaturals was confirmed, thanks in part to Michael's efforts, their communication was abruptly cut off due to a lack of signal. Given the advanced technology of the current age, the sudden loss of network signals made little sense. However, it didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. The situation was clearly orchestrated by the demonic supernaturals. As for why the demonic supernaturals would want to cut off the Supers Association's ability to communicate with the outside world, the answer was painfully obvious. The chaotic energy that was blanketing the sky made it clear. They wanted to isolate the city. From the few level 4 cracks they could sense, the two strongest people in Woodstone City, aside from Brian, knew this wasn't a matter they or their branch could handle alone. They needed reinforcements. Unfortunately, that was precisely what the demonic supernaturals were determined to prevent. With no way to rely on technology to call for help, the two master-rank cultivators, a knight and a mage, each with the ability to fly, set out to leave the city. They didn't get far. Their path was intercepted by several rank 4 demonic cultivators. The battle that ensued was fierce, and the two masters would have fallen if not for the other strong members of their association branch rushing to back them up in time. Even then, it became evident that the demonic supernaturals were well prepared for this confrontation. The constant reinforcements from the demonic side proved their intent. They were more than ready for this fight. As for summoning the next strongest person in Woodstone City, it became clear why the strongest of the demonic supernaturals hadn't also personally joined the fray. They were keeping the city's own strongest defender occupied. Helpless, the Supers Association could only continue to fight. Eventually, the appearance of a level 5 crack shifted the tide of the battle. The demonic supernaturals, having accomplished their goals, began to retreat. But just as the supernaturals thought the ordeal was over, the griffins that soared in the sky had other ideas. These winged beasts weren't about to let anyone escape so easily, and another battle erupted, this time between humans and monsters instead of humans and demonic cultivators. Meanwhile, in the Supers Association branch Michael was familiar with, Deputy Manager Leo stood with an irritated expression as he questioned a trembling staff member before him. "What are the other cities saying?" They. They what? Deputy Manager Leo's patience was nearing its end, but the staff member's next words hit him like a bucket of cold water. "Sir, I've contacted the 2 cities closest to us, but they're also facing similar challenges." "So what you're trying to say is, cracks have appeared in their areas as well?" "Yes, sir. However, there doesn't seem to be any sign of a level 5 crack on their side." "We're doomed." Deputy Manager Leo didn't bother hiding his despair as he muttered those words aloud, uncaring that someone was standing right next to him. For the first time in as long as he could remember, the late-stage rank 3 knight felt fear once more. What he didn't say aloud was that, even though the other cities didn't have a level 5 crack on their side, they were likely just as doomed as Woodstone City. Their overall strength wasn't significantly better after all. With several level 4 cracks in their regions, if reinforcements from nearby cities didn't arrive soon, it was uncertain how much they could save of their own territories. However, Deputy Manager Leo had his own immediate concerns to focus on. Though retired from the battlefield, Leo wasn't someone who lost his composure easily. Old habits died hard, and it wasn't as if all hope was lost. So what if there was a level 5 crack, or even more than one? They had someone with a similar level of power in Woodstone City. It was cruel to rely on one individual to handle such a daunting situation, but Deputy Manager Leo couldn't think of a better alternative at the moment. Besides, the cracks didn't seem like they were going to break open immediately, so technically, they still had time to request aid. King-rank cultivators weren't easy to mobilize, and in the current situation they would need more than just one or two. Still, Leo clung to hope, praying for a miracle. If they could get word to the Federation in time without encountering further obstacles, a king-rank expert who could traverse realms wouldn't take long to arrive. With that sliver of hope in mind, Deputy Manager Leo prepared himself. He was about to instruct the staff in front of him to contact some key individuals, while also considering if there was a way to reach that man, someone far stronger than his rank suggested, when he heard a familiar voice beside him. Before he could react, his surroundings were engulfed in blue flames, coating everything within sight. "Brief me on everything that's happened," the voice commanded. "Master Brian." No, this energy." Michael stared at his panel with a smile tugging at his lips. He tried his best to suppress any sense of satisfaction from the chaos around him, but the joy of leveling up was impossible to ignore. Level 20. This was Michael's current level. In just a few hours, he had surged from level 15 to level 20. No, that wasn't even the full story. He had only recently advanced to rank 1. If he accounted for that, he had essentially jumped from level 10 to 20 in a matter of hours. However, Michael knew his rapid growth was likely nearing its peak. 200,000 experience points to level up to 21, he muttered, his brow furrowing slightly. He wasn't certain he could manage another level. Not because the city lacked monsters to hunt, but because his self-imposed time limit was almost up. Any minute now, he would be forced to make a decision. However, these thoughts were interrupted as the sky above suddenly brightened. When Michael had initially awakened, even before the moment itself, his thoughts were filled with how his awakening would be a life-changing event for him. He didn't know how it would happen, but he believed it should enable him and his family to live a better life. Thoughts of supreme power weren't his primary intention back then. He had them, but they weren't his main focus. He considered them a natural goal to strive for. That changed when he saw that video on the forum. That demigod. Michael knew that figure hadn't gone all out, yet a single attack from them was enough to bring a 100-meter monster crashing to the ground. A 100 meters. What kind of power concept was that? It was impossible for him to quantify. That sight made him vow that day to grow, just as strong as that figure. When he first leveled up and felt the drastic surge of strength, that resolve only deepened. Then came the discovery of his talent ability, which strengthened his desire to grow even more. And now, Michael looked up at the sight in the sky. High above was a figure emitting a brilliant blue light, like a flame cutting through the darkness. The energy radiating from the figure matched the ominous energy of level 5 cracks teetering on the edge of breaking. However, that wasn't what stunned Michael. What truly shook him, making his heart race, whether from excitement or fear he couldn't tell, was the sheer display of power from the figure in the sky. Michael watched as blue spheres of flame rained down from the heavens. Every monster they touched disintegrated into ash. Within each of those small, radiant flames, Michael could sense a power so overwhelming it could obliterate him in an instant. The feeling dwarfed anything Lucky could emit, or even the terror of that corrupted monster. he had faced in the abandoned ruin in the land of origin. What kind of power is this? Who is that being? Michael could only stare in awe. Unfortunately, the blazing light from the figure and the great distance between them made it impossible to identify who they were. Then silence fell. The blue light vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. In the wake of the figure's departure were only the ashes of every monster, scattered by the wind. For the first time in his life, Michael had witnessed a power capable of leveling entire cities. For the first time, he felt truly insignificant. Just as he stood there stunned, his phone's ringtone jolted him back to reality. Slightly dazed, Michael shook off his shock and retrieved his phone, only to find a message from the association. Thanks to the early reinforcement of a king-rank expert, the immediate danger in the city has been cleared. However, there's still a possibility of stray monsters. Supernaturals are urged to remain vigilant and eliminate any threats. Please also be cautious of demonic supernaturals that might have survived the king-rank expert's attack. Protect the public and rest assured, more reinforcements are on their way. That was a king-rank cultivator. Michael wondered aloud, still in shock over what he had just witnessed. So strong, he murmured. As an awakener, Michael understood the potential of his kind. At rank 1, nearing its peak, Michael believed he could already match most commander-rank cultivators. Imagine that, a rank 1 awakener equaling a rank 3 cultivator. The gap between the two paths was clear. The only rank he felt beyond his current reach was master-rank cultivators at rank 4. However, he was confident that would change when he advanced to rank 2 as an awakener. Even so, a small part of him had assumed that once he approached the peak of rank 2, dealing with a king-rank cultivator might not be impossible. Now he realized just how cocky he'd become, despite his repeated warnings to himself to remain cautious. He didn't know if advancing to rank 2 would offer more than a significant stat boost, but if it followed the same pattern as his previous breakthrough to rank 1, he could understand why king-rank cultivators were equated with rank 3 awakeners. The power to level cities in an instant. Michael couldn't imagine himself doing the same at rank 2. As he was now, he could destroy a city single-handedly, but only if he had time and wasn't interrupted by other supernaturals. Yet the figure in the sky had just eradicated multiple rank 1 to rank 4 creatures, while simultaneously avoiding harm to ordinary humans and buildings, and all in an instant. And they were clearly holding back. This was evident from the reports of the possibility of stray monsters and demonic supernaturals still lurking. Michael also knew how ominous his own energy was. If that figure targeted demonic beings based solely on their energy, he'd be dead by now. Even some of his undead, despite their monstrous appearances and the death energy radiating from them, remained untouched. It was clear that the figure wasn't going all out. If they had truly wanted to bring down the entire city, Michael had no doubt they could have done so effortlessly. Maybe I don't need to reach rank 3 as an awakener to achieve something similar, Michael thought suddenly. Maybe if my skill mastery reaches a high enough level, I could do the same. Michael wasn't sure, though. For one, the range of his undead skills hadn't expanded much, even as their mastery level increased. Whatever, I haven't even reached the max level at rank 1 to be thinking this far ahead. Finally recovering from his earlier shock, Michael took a deep breath. Knowing that the immediate danger had subsided, he turned with his undead in tow and began the journey back to his community, where he had left his family. Along the way, Michael began contemplating his next steps. According to the message from the association, reinforcements, possibly more figures like the one he had just witnessed, were on their way. If there were others with that level of power, then it seemed plausible that the current chaos could be brought under control. However, Michael remained skeptical. Even if such figures could handle rank 5 monsters, who were likely on the same level as them, the battles wouldn't end quickly. And battles of that scale wouldn't just be prolonged. They would inevitably create shockwaves capable of implicating countless others in the crossfire. In the end, Michael decided not to head back home. After gathering his nearby undead and dismissing them into the netherworld, he made his way to the Supers Association. The 3 looming level 5 cracks in the sky didn't seem likely to erupt anytime soon, so Michael wanted to use this brief window to gather as much information as possible before making his next move. Currently, the only person in the entire city who might have the answers he sought was Brian. From the threatening aura Michael could vaguely sense from Brian, even after his own advancement, and from the fact that during his last call with the association, the staff mentioned needing someone of higher authority and heading to Brian, it was clear to Michael that Brian wasn't just a regular figure within the Supers Association. Perhaps even within the Federation as a whole, Brian's position was far from ordinary. Michael decided to try his luck and see if he could learn more about the current situation. There were a lot of things he wanted to understand if time allowed. The status of the demonic supernaturals, the association's plans for handling the level 5 cracks, and details about the demon remains the demonic cultivators had used before the chaos began. Though it was a stretch to call Brian an acquaintance, they were at least familiar with each other. Michael didn't think he'd be turned away outright. As he sped toward the association, Michael hoped nothing had happened to Brian and that he'd still be present there. Even while moving at high speed, Michael couldn't help but take in the destruction surrounding him. The city was in ruins. Ruins! That was all Michael could see, aside from the scattered bodies of both monsters and humans. Despite his growing numbness to such scenes, Michael found himself frowning. The demonic supernaturals had truly dealt a devastating blow to humanity this time. Michael couldn't help but wonder how the Federation would address the public after such widespread destruction. This level of devastation was far too massive to conceal. With the Federation already beginning to release information about supernaturals, a part of Michael suspected this event might force them to reveal even more. It didn't take long for Michael to arrive at the association. There was no fighting at the moment, but the area was bustling with activity. With his heightened senses, Michael could tell most of the people around were supernaturals. Some were tending to corpses and the injured, while others stood motionless or moved about in a daze. Only the heavens knew what was going through their minds. Michael spared them a quick glance before making his way into the association building, alongside a group of rushing supernaturals. Interestingly, from snippets of conversation he overheard, Michael learned that if he'd been closer to the association during the earlier battle, he could have received a free weapon and some potions. Even now, injured supernaturals could apply for treatment, and the process didn't seem too difficult. Fortunately, Michael didn't need any of this. As for the free equipment he had missed, he figured it wasn't much of a loss. Accepting it would have meant he had chosen to be near the association, instead of ensuring his family's safety. Besides, what kind of equipment could the association realistically hand out in bulk, considering the scarcity of magical items? Even now, the association still owed him 12 hammers and 13 sets of armor. At most, the free weapons and armor would probably be slightly better than the first spear he had used. Once inside, Michael scanned the counters, trying to spot a familiar face. Unfortunately, Grace was nowhere to be seen. Knowing she wasn't there, he strode toward the trade center, hoping Brian might be there. Though he wanted to move faster, the crowded building made any sudden movements risky. Running or flashing through the crowd could lead to accidental collisions, and there was no urgent reason to rush for such close distance. It didn't take long for Michael to reach the trade center, but as he had half expected, Brian wasn't there. Instead, an unfamiliar face stood behind the counter, addressing several people at once. Disappointment flickered across Michael's face as he frowned. Just as he was about to turn and leave, a familiar voice echoed in his mind. "What are you looking for, boy?" Michael stiffened, alarmed by the sudden voice in his mind. Soon, he quickly calmed down when he recognized it. "Teacher Brian." "Yes. What is this?" "Just a slightly advanced form of communication. This is only my second time using it, though. The first person I tried it on almost died. Seems like my control has improved this time." Michael froze, his good mood vanishing as a chill ran down his spine. Can you tell me where you are now? I have something I want to ask." "Sure, leave the association building. I'm outside. I sensed a familiar aura, so I knew you were here." "All right." Michael complied, heading out of the association building. As much as he wanted to yell at Brian to get his damned voice out of his mind, he held back. There were more important things to focus on. Once outside, Michael scanned the area but couldn't see any sign of Brian. "Teacher Brian," he called out mentally, trying to replicate the connection. Fortunately, the call seemed to work. "I'm coming," Brian replied, his tone casual. "Just testing to see if this method would work. Ah, yes, come here." Michael frowned at the cryptic response, his confusion growing. Before he could question it further, his surroundings shifted in an instant. One moment, he was standing outside the association. The next, he found himself high in the sky, the city far below him. A familiar voice spoke from behind him. "The ways of the King Realm are truly mysterious. To think that idiot couldn't even beat me with all this." Michael turned quickly, spotting Brian hovering casually in midair, exuding an intense aura of power. "What is it you want to ask me, boy?" Brian asked, his tone calm yet commanding. "The King Realm. To cultivators, this marked the true beginning of transcending mortality. With a lifespan of 2,000 years, it was considered near immortality by ordinary humans. Even to supernaturals below this realm, such longevity was almost incomprehensible. Though no one had yet lived to the end of this lifespan, Aurora's supernatural history spanned barely 300 years. The knowledge brought by the Awakeners from the land of origin and the Federation's own research provided a clear understanding of its possibilities. Since the first King Realm cultivators appeared, some of those who resided in areas where time moved significantly faster relative to the real world were still alive and thriving. This realm was truly something one couldn't fully grasp without stepping into it. Even for someone as powerful and knowledgeable as Brian, its intricacies were vast. As one of the rare cultivators capable of comprehending a law, and not just any law, but a powerful one, and also being able to use it well, Brian had always stood out. Before his ascension, he could wield his law with mastery that rivaled those a rank above him. But upon finally ascending, the difference was astonishing. The most immediate and significant change was the energy his law seed began generating. This wasn't mana, it was something far greater. Law energy. The very essence of the world. At least that's how it felt to Brian. Before reaching the King Realm, Brian had fueled his law with his life force and mana. But mana, though powerful, was still a lesser refined energy compared to law energy. This was why his flames, though terrifying, could still be extinguished or resisted by true rank 5 cultivators. Their superiority wasn't necessarily in the strength of their laws, but in the higher level at which those laws operated. Yet even with this disadvantage, Brian had always been an anomaly. His understanding and control over his law placed him in a league of his own. The technique he used to bring Michael into the sky was one that any seasoned rank 5 cultivator could employ, a skill that even the previous Brian had been capable of, though not as proficiently. Transportation through void nodes. Void nodes are naturally occurring points in space that connect the physical world to the vast, ethereal dimension known as the void. The void is a boundless, chaotic expanse existing between realms and dimensions, filled with immense energy but also extreme danger. Void nodes serve as gateways or focal points where the boundary between the physical realm and the void is thin. Void knobs was also the entrance one used to enter the void. These nodes act as anchors, making it possible to access the void for various purposes such as instantaneous travel or even crossing into other realms. True realm traveling required delving deeper into the void, a perilous endeavor for those lacking sufficient strength. For Brian, such feats were now second nature. Connecting a void node beside him to the one behind Michael, Brian teleported to the latter's position before bringing them both back in a single motion. It was a technique he could use before his advancement, but unlike the focus it once required, now it was almost instinctive, accomplished with little more than a thought. "What's this?" Michael stammered, his voice trembling as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The world around him was unfamiliar, and for a moment his mind went blank, forgetting the question he had meant to ask. It wasn't until he noticed that he seemed to be floating in the air, suspended high above the ground, that panic began to creep in. The dizzying height made his heart race. "Calm down," Brian said. "You're acting like you've never seen much of the world before." Michael wanted to retort. He wanted to say that, yes, he hadn't seen much of the world but managed to keep it to himself. In the end, Brian's remark managed to ground him. Taking a deep breath, he steadied himself and forced his gaze downward. For the first time in his life, Michael saw the entirety of Woodstone in a single view. What should have been a majestic sight of a bustling city was instead a somber panorama of ruin. Fires raged in scattered pockets, plumes of smoke curling toward the sky. Entire sections of the city lay in rubble, and vast patches of ground glistened ominously with streaks of crimson. It took only a second glance for Michael to realize what the red was. Blood. Hovering above the devastation, Michael truly began to grasp the scale of what was happening. The view from this height revealed things that were impossible to discern from the ground. His senses, sharpened by his proximity to the sky, detected the chaotic energy emanating from the cracks below even more acutely now. Though they were directly above the cracks, they didn't appear much different than they had from the surface, at least at first glance. Yet the oppressive feeling of instability was unmistakably stronger here. "Are you concerned about the cracks?" Brian finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence that had lingered between them. His voice was calm, almost casual as always. However, Michael could hear a subtle difference this time. It had been there since Brian first spoke to him at the Supers Association, but now it was becoming more pronounced. Brian's indifference, it wasn't something Michael could easily put into words. It had always been there, but now it felt different. More natural, almost effortless. It wasn't as if Brian had been pretending before, but now the indifference seemed to carry an unshackled air, an aura of freedom that made it seem as though nothing could bind him. "Cultivators can fly?" Michael asked. "Yes," Brian replied. "Starting from master rank, we can fly through certain methods, just like you awakens. Or, considering the time, maybe when you advance again." Michael wanted to ask more, but as usual, Brian cut to the chase. "You were looking for me?" he asked directly, his sharp gaze locking onto Michael. Though Michael felt a little frustrated at how Brian always forced the conversation to go at his own pace, there was also a sense of familiarity. Despite the changes, this was still the same Brian. Different, yet undeniably the same. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be SUPRISC for all of you. Stay tuned.